welcome to this edition of our Live and Invest Overseas podcasts. My name is Kat Kalashian. I'm your host for today. And joining me today is Sophia Titley, who is you're the editorial chief or the
Editorial
editor in
director.
chief,
Yeah.
editorial director of Live and Invest Overseas. She's actually based over here with me in Europe, but she is in London, I believe. Is that where you are right now?
Correct. Yes.
All right. So we are coming to you from Europe, and we're here to talk today a little bit about our 2022 Live and Invest Overseas Retirement Index, which, full disclosure, I was our editorial director for several years. I did several years worth of these indexes, so I do have a little bit of a behind the scenes knowledge of what we're going to be talking about today, which I think is a great way to introduce it to you, our loyal followers. So Sophia and I are just going to have a little bit of a conversation talking about our experiences and how we have come to have the index that we have today. So thanks for joining us, Sophia. And let's just get started with you telling us a little bit about the index. What is it? Who is it for? What is its purpose?
Sure. So every year, like you mentioned, we come up with this index, and it's a giant expanded issue of one of our main publications called Overseas Living Letter. And what the index is it presents a selection of the world's best places to retire overseas for the coming year. So we release it end of December, early January, and it tells you what we think are the best places to think about spending time overseas for this new year. So our 2022 one just came out a few weeks ago, and it showed our readers the 15 best places that we came up with for you guys to think about overseas retirement. And the way we come up with those 15 destinations, we think about the many hundreds of destinations all over the world, but we narrow it down to that 15 by leveraging our collective years of international experience. How many years would you say between Kathy and Leaf they have between them?
God, they probably wouldn't want me to do that math, but I know that Kathleen alone has about 35 years of experience, and I would say Leaf is probably up at around 20. So a full, well-developed, mature human being's worth of knowledge.
Right. And I have a few
And
years
so
myself.
why 15? How come not 5 or 50?
That's a good question. So we do start out with a lot more in the beginning, usually around 25 to 30 destinations. And then through a series of meetings, we kind of narrow it down, and we tick things off the list basically, because we put them through the ringer. We measure them against all these different categories. And if a place doesn't score well enough, it gets booted off the list. It is very difficult to narrow things down because there are so many great places all around the world that people should be considering.
Of course, yeah, I imagine that's probably one of the most difficult things is to try and narrow it down.
Definitely.
So I guess I'm guessing that most of these destinations or places that we're talking about regularly. How would you say a new place gets introduced onto the list? So many of these places are names we're very familiar with. Paris or Belize, places that people are kind of familiar with and that we've been writing
Mhm.
about. But each year, I know that we put a lot of effort into introducing at least a couple of new destinations that nobody's really heard of before. And how do we come by those?
Right. So this year's index actually had quite a few brand new destinations that not only have never been in the index, we've just never covered them at all. And the way we stumbled upon those places was um, through our international network of contributors and trusted contacts all around the globe, who basically we talk to them all the time, and they tell us, "Oh, you should be really considering so and so destination." For example, our winner this year was brand new,
I
which
was going to
I
ask, would you mind telling us about some of the new destinations real quick?
yeah, of course. So the winner was Comporta, Portugal, which I found out about when I went on a scouting trip to Portugal at the end of last year. And while I was there, I was meeting with various people and talking to different contacts. And I kept hearing about this place that was about an hour and a half south of Lisbon that is supposed to be amazing. Unfortunately, I didn't get the chance to go there during that trip, but I I looked it up. I did a lot of research and I spoke to people who had been there and confirmed that it was a great place for us to be covering. Not only that, it won the index, so that is another huge accomplishment for that place. A few of the other places, we talked about Ubud, which is an area of Bali, Indonesia. It's a non-coastal destination, which is kind of a shock when you're talking about Bali. You think beaches; it must be in there because the beaches are so
Surfing,
amazing.
yeah.
Exactly, but it's a highland destination, so that was new. We also included Istria, Croatia. I know you guys have you spent some time there, or you've uh, invested in that region of the country. We covered where else was new. I think Santa Marta was a brand new destination. Santa Marta,
Yeah, I
Colombia.
don't remember Santa Marta ever making it. That's in Colombia for
Yes,
anybody unfamiliar. And
exactly.
Santa Marta is actually on the Caribbean coast of Colombia, isn't it?
Yes, and that's the thing. Like when most people think about the Caribbean, Colombia doesn't really come to mind,
Right.
which is why Santa Marta is so cool because it's kind of a local travel destination. People know about Cartagena, but not so much Santa Marta. It's more of the locals' alternative to Cartagena, which can be a bit overpriced and touristy. So that was
Cool.
another new one.
Wow, yeah, a lot more new this year than than have we've had in the past lately. So let's circle back to Comporta because I know that Portugal has been the winner. Whether it's country overall or some specific region or city have has been winning. Portugal is our big winner for several years running now. So what was it that put Comporta over the edge over all of the other places we could have talked about in Portugal this year?
Well, a big factor is that it's in Portugal, which is such an amazing country for so many reasons. You know, it's one of the safest countries in the world, which is a really big deal in today's world, especially for people from the United States. It's easy in terms of residency. It has, several routes you can take to get residency in the country. It's reasonable in terms of taxes, and it is affordable compared to much of Western Europe. So the fact that it was in Portugal, it already had a leg up on all these other places. Um, as you know, the Algarve has been the winner for the past God knows how many years, 8 years or
Yeah.
so. And I did go to the Algarve during my trip. Um, and basically, Comporta stood out compared to the Algarve in that it is totally undeveloped. So it's
Hmm.
nestled between, it's right below this environmentally protected area, which meant that development couldn't really happen. Plus, it has this complicated history of it being owned by one family for many, many years, a
Hmm.
huge swath of the area. So it never saw major development. It stayed very rustic and rugged, um, which is again, it's really hard to find in today's world. Like find a beach town that doesn't have you know hotels all along the beach or condo blocks. Um,
Right,
that's what.
especially in Europe. You might find that if you travel for hours now, or even in Panama, where both of us have lived at our where our Leo's headquarters are. You can drive for 8 hours and get to the end of the country, and you'll find a beach with no development. But in Europe, that's not quite so possible anymore. I wouldn't think.
No, so that's what makes it so special. And then there are other reasons, like it happens to be where Portugal grows all of its rice. So
Oh,
there's rice paddies everywhere, which I thought was so unique because,
yeah,
I think rice paddy and I think Southeast Asia.
right.
So it has this really amazing landscape, lack of development. It's kind of a controversial choice. It may not be for everyone because it's not the Algarve. Like it doesn't have that huge booming expat community, but that could be a positive or a negative depending on your preferences. Some people don't want to be in a condo complex where all their neighbors are from the UK, for instance, which might be the case depending on where you go in the Algarve. Um,
Absolutely. And
yeah.
I think actually, not to cut you off, but I think this is a big point about the index that I want to make clear in case anybody is a newcomer. Live and invest overseas, we take great pains and pride in the fact that we cover everything warts and all, as we say. And so, no place is perfect for everybody. For one person going to the ends of the earth and not having any development or infrastructure or whatever you want to call it is a huge pro, another person, it's a huge con. I mean, for me, that's kind of a con. I would like to have a beach bar set up when I get to the beach. I don't want to have to bring my own champagne with me everywhere I go. And as same thing for weather. You can make this argument about anything essentially. So for me, I lived in Panama for 7 years. It's the tropics. Most people, that's what they want in life. They want heat all year round. They don't want snow ever again in their lives. I prefer seasons. After 7 years of living in Panama, I said I'm never living on the equator ever again because I found it really difficult to live without seasons. And then, of course, I came to Europe, and there's a new adjustment to get used to seasons and the fact that daylight hours change. So every place has its pros and cons, and I think that list could be totally reversed depending on who you are. What's a pro for one is a con for another. So this is why we try and draw out all of these differences,
Mhm.
whether they're good or they're bad. That's kind of for you to decide. We can tell you about the climate, we can tell you about the infrastructure, we can tell you what residency options there are, we can tell you what your tax burden would be or would not be. We can tell you about the budgeting and all of these things, but you're the one who has to decide if those are the things you want or not. And this is the beauty of the index, is that this is probably the one time a year when we as editors don't get to take any poetic license. We have to put the numbers, put the data in tables, compare everything side by side, try and quantify everything that isn't quantifiable, and try and deliver you, a comparison, try to give you apples to compare to apples, even though none of these places are really apples to apples at all. And so I think that's one of the big, huge benefits of reading the index every year.
And we do get a lot of feedback from our readers after it comes out, saying things like, "Oh, I was set on moving to Panama, but I see you've ranked it 13th this year, and now I'm questioning my choice. Like, why has Panama come out so low in the rankings?" And like you said, so all these places are filtered through 13 categories. These are the categories that we consider to be the most important things for retirees to be considering. Things like cost of living, residency, taxes, cultural amenities, environmental factors, English spoken, etc. And we weigh all of these categories, all 13 of them, equally. But you as a person, depending on your preferences, you might be looking at um, cost of living and proximity to great hospitals. So you can look at those two categories in the index and use the rankings to kind of figure out which place is going to be best for you. So it's kind of a tool to help you figure this out, more so like a definitive sort of, this is the best and don't think about anything else. It's
Right.
not telling you what to do. It's supposed to be a tool to help you think all this through.
Right, of course, and I remember those emails. It's been a while since I was on that side of the desk, but I remember every year some people would panic a little bit saying, "Well, what happened? Belize was number 4 last year and I was all set. I had my bags packed. What happened that it dropped to number 9?" Nothing really happened. Well, first of all, we bring in new places and we take out
Mhm.
old places, and that changes where things fall in the hierarchy of things. But right. What comes in at number 11 for us, maybe number one for you. And that's I guess what we're trying to say about weighing all these categories. So let's take a step back then. And Sophia, why don't you explain to us a little bit more about the grading process? So you mentioned there are all these categories. Can you give those to us again, please?
For sure. So again, there are 13 categories of consideration. We've come up with these 13 based on our own experiences of moving overseas. I've moved overseas a handful of times. And again, between Kathleen Leaf and the other team members, there have been a lot of international moves. And we also have surveyed our readers to come up with these things that are considered to be the most important things to consider. So I'll just run through the list. There's cost of living, healthcare, entertainment, recreation, English spoken, expat community, access to North America, infrastructure, which is a cross section of internet access, electricity reliability, and domestic access. So things like public transportation and road quality. Uh, Environmental factors, crime, real estate restrictions, residency, and taxes. So that's the full list. And for every destination that we put forward as part of the selection of that year's index, every destination gets a grade in every single one of those categories. And when I say a grade, I mean a letter grade between A plus and F. And then based on that destination's performance across all of these categories, it gets an aggregate grade, again between A plus and F. And then using those grades,
Okay.
using those grades, we create a ranking. So, in
Gotcha. Yeah.
Portuguese, we have
So,
a
I mean, I've been there, and I remember. I mean, those months that you're working on the index, it feels like your brain becomes a spreadsheet. You know, you have so
yes.
many numbers and letters going on in your head at all times. I feel for you. I know how how that really takes over your life for a few
Mhm.
months. So let's see. I want to give some examples to people who maybe aren't as familiar with the index. So, for example, here's a couple of categories that I think can be problematic for people. We have two categories. One is called entertainment, and the other is called recreation. Why don't you give us the quick spiel about what makes those two things different?
Okay, so for both of them, to start out, these are all amenities that are available within 1 hour of the destination. For entertainment, it's all the cultural amenities. So things that you can do in this place on a rainy day,
Okay.
things like going to the museum, going to the movie theater, going to the mall, things like that. Things that I think we include golf as one of these as well because it's like a human made um, activity.
Yeah, things to do on a rainy day, that definitely struck a chord with me. Golf, that's interesting if golf made it used to be in recreation when I was doing it because it was things that you'd do outside rather than inside, but it could have
Right.
changed. I haven't looked that closely.
So yes, it's all the man-made attractions that you
Okay.
might want to visit. We also include like historical attractions, dining options. If there's anything that that place is, you know, known for, um, that would fall under like Paris, for instance, is the pinnacle of the entertainment category. It gets the highest score every year because there's just so much on offer there in terms of all the art, all the museums, all the dining, etc.
Right. So thinking of examples of things that we could do in Paris. So the theater, concerts, opera,
Mhm.
the symphony, basically anything that you can do with a roof over your head is what I'm thinking of.
Exactly.
All right.
And
And
then
then recreation, I'm guessing, is the other side of that.
yes, so it's all the outdoor recreation opportunities that are on offer, and that includes what's naturally available with the landscape. So, for instance, if we're talking about Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. It's
Hmm.
on the coast and it has mountains available, and you can do literally anything there. So, you can go fishing, hiking, quadding. Um, I think there's surf available. Like you can do almost any sort of outdoor thing that you can imagine, horseback riding. Um
Abruzzo always really shines in this category to me because they've got the beach there, but also the mountains, and depending on the season, whether it's summer or winter, you could go skiing or surfing. So yeah, it's interesting. You can't go skiing in Mexico, but
That's
but
true.
otherwise,
No, you can't.
Puerto Vallarta might have just about everything.
I
But
think
right, so it's things to do outside, whatever they may be. And it's funny
yes.
because what is always interesting about the category to me is that a well-planned city can actually offer just as much recreation as, the middle of nowhere rural place. So,
True.
a well-planned city with really nice big parks, lakes, a city that wants its residents to take advantage of the outdoors can do that really well. So I put Paris in that category. I know I'm forever um,
Biased.
colored when it comes to Paris. It's always going to be my favorite. But there are many, many cities that, I mean, New York, you would say the same thing. I think, without getting too far away, you can do a lot of real recreation. So it's just something to keep in mind that you don't need to be out in the middle of nowhere to get your
True enough.
mountain hiking.
And I think with those two categories, like they may not be as critical as say taxes or residency, but they are the two that I'd say most affect how much you actually enjoy day-to-day life in this destination. Um, they have a lot of weight for me personally, at least, because you know they how much fun do you want to have when you move overseas?
Yeah.
These two categories can really affect that.
No, that's a great insight actually, because and I think maybe that's why I subconsciously veered towards those to get started because for me they are the most meaningful as well. I mean it really like you say it shows what you're going to do on a daily basis. It shows what your real lifestyle would be.
Mhm.
One of the little test questions we offer people when they say, you know, how can I possibly choose where to live out of this huge world and all of the places you talk about, you know, it can be overwhelming. And the number one thing for me that makes the most sense is to ask somebody what you want to see when you look out, when you open your drapes and look out the window, or when you know, open your door and step out onto your front steps. What do you want to see
Mhm.
beyond your threshold there? And it's more about what you're doing day to day. So right, you're as you're saying, there are many important categories that we'll talk about in a minute that are not quite as exciting or as interesting, and they matter a great deal, but they're not necessarily things that I think, and I think most of us on staff would agree, they're not deal breakers necessarily. You know,
Mhm.
you want to know what your tax burden, what your liability is going to be in your new home, but you're not necessarily going to make your decision on where to move based on where the taxes are the most favorable, right?
No, and
Let's
you
hope
shouldn't.
anyway. But you would make your decision based on, you know, the weather that's outside your window
Mhm.
and what that weather allows you to do on a daily basis. So, you know, for example, I said I need the seasons. I need the variety. I need something different to do in winter than I do in summer, else life gets a little bit monotonous and it's, you know, for me that's an important thing that's not as important to other people. But I like this question a lot. So, would you say that your most important category would be the entertainment and recreation, or is there another one that competes for you when it in your own personal database?
I would add expat community, but in the sense of like opportunities to socialize. I don't necessarily need to socialize with other expats. I
Hmm.
just need a way to meet people, and I
Right.
don't care whether they're locals or other expats. I think like developing that social network um, as soon as you can. It's not easy to do, but that really affects my personal quality of life in a new place. If I don't
Absolutely.
know a single person, um, it makes it a lot more lonely.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just having opportunity to socialize is really
Yeah.
important to me.
I think a lot of people don't give that the weight that it deserves when they get to a new place. You know, you've already upended your life. You know, and I won't get too much down into this digression. We can do a whole nother podcast about this another day. But when you get to a new place, you know, it can be a little depressing at first. You've left your whole life behind. You're in unfamiliar territory. You have no routine set up. You don't have your support system, and you know some people can succumb to a little bit of depression or panic or you know any other of these strong emotions when they get to a new place, and having at least the motivation to go and make new friends. You're not going to make friends instantly, you know, it takes time, but if you have the motivation and you put the effort in, it really goes a long way to making you feel like you belong. And I think that's what can depress people when they get to a new place, that feeling of not belonging. And
Mhm.
just having a couple friends that you can call. They don't need, you know, acquaintances at first. They don't need to be your best friend, but somebody to call to say, "Hey, I'm looking for Parmesan breadsticks. Where can I go get them?" You know, random weird little things. And some of the best friends that I've made in my life have been, you know, expats, not necessarily American or even Anglophone expats, but you know, expats who are from all over the world and continuing all over the world. So keep an open mind when it comes to your expat community, but definitely plug into it as soon as you can. I want to touch quickly on the English spoken category because again, this is a big controversial category that can go either way. Lee Harrison, for example, is one of our longtime editors. He's our Latin America correspondent, and I think he's loosened up a little bit about this over the years, but in the beginning, he had some strong opinions. You know, he said, if you're going to go overseas, why would you surround yourself with a bunch of people that you could have been surrounded by back home? You know, if you're going to go, you should really immerse yourself. You should make local friends, speak the language, blah, blah, blah. And basically go local. This is one of another of the phrases that we use, whether you go local or you know you kind of stay within a little expat bubble, and you can do these to varying degrees. think anybody who's very successful probably walks a middle line. They don't go necessarily too far one way or the other. But he was all about the going local in the beginning. And as I say, he's loosened up about this a lot recently. But for him, a place that had a lot of English speakers where English spoken was to be taken for granted, that wouldn't be an adventure. And he would have really looked down on that. If he had seen any place getting a good grade in that category, he probably would have just crossed it right off his list. On the other hand, somebody who's barely been outside of the United States, who's, this their first time overseas, for sure, having English spoken is going to be a huge asset, a huge benefit to you, and will make your life much, much easier. It'll make everything more convenient. You'll have many fewer frustrating moments that you
Hmm.
will definitely have in a place where you have to speak a second language. Um, and so I just wanted to draw out that it's another thing where, it could be a total pro for you that they speak English, or it could be a total con for you if they speak English. So it's something to keep in mind when you're looking at that category.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, you can use the index and tailor it to your preferences. So if you're like Lee, you can literally go through and look at the places that got an A or an A plus for English spoken and eliminate them. And
Right.
then on the flip side, look at places that got a C or D,
Yeah.
um, and put those higher on your list. So it
Yeah.
is customizable.
Absolutely. So let's just talk really quickly about some of the not quite so exciting stuff, like residency and taxes. I'm trying to think, is there anything else I guess healthcare is another of it's definitely an important category.
Yeah.
Um, and so let's just cover healthcare real quick. What is it that we're looking at in the healthcare category specifically?
We are looking at what's available within 1 hour of the destination in terms of public healthcare and private facilities,
Okay.
and the quality of care that's offered at those facilities. And we get the information through our own knowledge and by speaking to expats and our contacts and contributors who are currently on the ground in those destinations.
Okay,
Um,
so for example, give us an example. Give us some place that scores really well for healthcare, and list the reasons that it scores so well.
So France, it got an A plus for healthcare, or Paris, I should say. Um,
Once
but
again, Paris always
yes,
wins.
it's ranked number one by the World Health Organization's ranking of best healthcare systems in the world. And based on your insights that I use for the index, it sounds like the healthcare there is as high quality as you could possibly want, and also affordable. Um, and as far as I understand, you can get into the public system after a certain amount of time being there and being a legal resident. Um, you can access the local health system, which is of an amazing standard. So you're actually paying very low amounts compared to the United States for what is extremely high quality care.
And then let's just round it out with one of the poorer grades. I'm guessing Belize fails this
Yes.
category.
It's unfortunate for Belize. It's just not developed. It has a tiny population, and it doesn't have the funds for a full blown, um, amazing healthcare system. So, in the case of Belize, there are some public and private hospitals and clinics nearby. We covered Cayo in this year's index.
Okay.
Um, but most expats say they prefer to go abroad, whether they go back to the United States or over to Chetumal, Mexico, which is just across the border, to have their healthcare needs met. So it's not ideal in terms of, if you have an unfortunate incident or some sort of accident, it's something that you need to take into consideration that you're not going to have the best quality care available right next door. You're going to have to travel a bit, which everyone has their own personal level of risk that they're willing to
Mhm.
take. Um, that's something that you need to think about.
Right. So somebody with ongoing health problems, or somebody who's in an ongoing treatment program, certainly is not going to choose Belize, or let's say it wouldn't be the best place for you to choose. But for a healthy person without any
Yeah.
serious concerns, there's no reason to discount Belize. You might have to plan in advance a little bit more to get the care that you need. You might have to travel further than you might like to, but it's not like we wouldn't tell you don't ever go to Belize because you can't get the same standard of healthcare as in these other countries. It's just something, as Sophia says, that you've got to take into account and realize your own limitations. I mean, this is another thing that comes of living overseas is realizing your own preferences and really getting to know yourself. Is this realistic for you, and answer
Hmm.
that question as honestly as you can. So taxes, we don't really need to talk too much about taxes. Just trust us that we have experts who know what they're talking about, and will tell you if it's a pain or not. For example, just to throw this out there, most people think that moving to France specifically, or many other countries in Europe, would be unfeasible for tax reasons because they'll just tax you to death. This isn't actually true for many reasons that we don't need to get into here today. But the point is, we'd like to set the record straight for poor old France, who gets the bad end of the stick when it comes to taxes. So it's just another thing to keep in mind. And if this is a concern for you, know that there are more details in the index to help you answer these questions. And if not, that we know tax experts in countries that can help you figure out your tax situation, depending on where it is you're from and where you're moving to. Um, Moving swiftly on, residency. Can you just tell us a little bit about this? Because some people who are very new to this idea might not even have thought so far ahead as to realize that you do need to get a residency visa. You can't just hop on a plane and say, "All right, I'm here for life. You're never, you're never going to kick me out again." There are some things that you've got to do to be able to stay legally. So just give us a very, basic 101 kind of description of this.
For sure. So, in the index, we list out for every country that's covered how long you can spend there as a tourist. And it's usually between 30 to 90 to 180 days. Um, so, the most generous one on there was previously Mexico. It actually just changed its rules, but it allowed you to stay there for 180 days as a tourist, and you could just cross the border back to the United States, get a new 180-day stay. So, a lot of people just live in Mexico long term on a tourist visa, which is what you get when you just show up at the airport. But that just changed. So that was previously kind of the best case scenario.
Mhm.
Um, for every other place, unless you're okay with living there on a short term, part time basis, so let's say 30 to 90 days, you need to apply for some sort of residency visa. There are some countries out there that make it really easy for you. They want you to come in, especially as a retiree. They want you to come over and establish yourself and stick around. And they make, for example, that does that is Portugal. It has a bunch of different paths to residency. Some are easier to get than others, but they do make it very easy to obtain residency in the country. And then there are some
So,
countries that
sorry,
make it.
just sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Just give us a
That's
couple of
okay.
examples of the different ways that one qualifies for residency. So, I mean, because people know that, for example, there's like, refugee visas that are easy to get, but,
Mhm.
not everybody going overseas is going to fit that
Right.
category. So, what are some of the ways that people would become eligible?
Well, the most standard one for most people is just you show that you receive a certain amount of income per month, and
Okay.
then you get a residency visa. Then countries will do retire visas specifically for retirees. So if you're above a certain age and also have pension or passive income of a certain amount, then you can get residency in that country. One example of that is Belize, which if you can prove that you get, I think, $2,000 a month in retirement funds per month, then you can qualify for what's called the Qualified Retirement Program, which is a residency visa. Other types of residency, so they have investors visas. One kind of famous option is the golden visas, whereby you invest a certain amount in, say, real estate or some sort of government investment scheme. And it's kind of a fast track way of getting full license to live in the country and put you on a path to even citizenship um, in kind of a turnkey, very easy way. But those cost a lot more. So usually between like 250,000 euros to up to millions.
Mhm.
So they're not possible for every person out there. And then another residency type that we don't talk about as much is ancestry. So if you can show
Right.
an ancestral tie to, usually it's European countries, Western European countries,
Yeah.
you can get residency through that or citizenship.
Yeah, Italy, I know, is one of the easiest countries offering that. And so many Americans do have Italian heritage of some kind. And
Hmm.
most countries do require, a good bit of proof. You've got to track down birth certificates and things like that. Italy actually makes it pretty easy, and they go back several generations. So if you've got any Italian blood in you and you're thinking about moving to Italy, that's one to look into. All right, cool. Are there any other categories that we haven't delved into that you think are worth a mention?
Well, one that's always controversial as well is crime. So people want
All
to
right.
know how safe is this place, and we wouldn't really be speaking about any place that was unfit for you to be living in if it was, unsafe. We wouldn't include it on the list, but it's a bit of a tricky one because again, we speak to our contacts on the ground and expats that live there, and we get an idea of how safe they feel on a day to day basis. How much is pickpocketing a concern in their daily life? And that type of thing can be very opportunistic, and not necessarily a reflection of the country as a whole. Like for instance, living here in London, I'm probably 10 times more likely to be mugged than I am in um, Belize or
Right.
Cayo, Belize. But people don't like people's perceptions about crime are influenced in different ways. So it's a tough category to kind of explain to people.
Right, and it's astute what you're pointing out, the fact that, for example, pickpocketing or mugging is the specific little petty crimes that you're mentioning, and those, let's face it, those are tourist crimes. Those are
Yeah.
crimes that are for sure always targeting foreigners, of which you are one. If you're in another country, it doesn't matter if you're a tourist or not. You are a foreigner. You may look very different. You may sound very different. You may dress very differently. You may, have a camera or a phone that's nicer than those around you. Basically, you stick out, and depending on where you're moving, you may stick out to a greater, lesser degree. But if you're hanging, so for example, here in Paris, petty crime is a real problem because this is a huge tourist city, and
Mhm.
millions and millions of unsuspecting tourists are walking around with their money hanging out of their pockets, their cell phones sitting on the table in the cafe, their purse open on the metro, things that people who live here know very well you don't do. And while I am not necessarily a tourist, if I'm going to a tourist destination, if I'm going to a famous church or the Eiffel Tower, I know that I am for sure going to be targeted because even if they don't know that I'm a foreigner, they're assuming I am. They're assuming everyone there is not French or is not a local, and that they are kind of ripe for the picking. So it's just something to keep in mind, and it's also something that you, as I'm saying, you get better at once you've been in a place. You
Mhm.
start to know what the petty crimes are. For example, in Argentina, well, this was probably 20-year-old information at this point, but in Argentina there used to be tons of, you wouldn't necessarily call them muggings. I think it was more of like a grab and run kind of situation.
Mhm.
So you knew if you went to a cafe, if you left anything up on the table or even under your chair. My Leaf Simon, one of our editors and a co-founder of Live and Invest Overseas, at the time, way back when, was working in Argentina a lot. He was having a lunch with somebody, and they both had their laptops, in the laptop cases underneath of their chairs. And at some point in the meal, the guy looked down and said, "Oh, no, it's gone." Somebody had managed to sidle up to the table, pull it out from under the chair, and then ran off with it before anybody even noticed. So you get to know what what the crimes
Mhm.
are going to be in the place that you're in. You get to know what places to avoid. Um, And bigger crimes, as Sophia said, we wouldn't be telling you to go any place where you'd be seriously at risk, you know? So serious crimes happen all over the world. Always keep in mind that cities have higher crime rates than rural places. I think one of the things to look out for in rural places that we've talked about in the past is home break-ins, because if you are out with few neighbors, with few people around, it can be an opportunity. As again, as we're saying, these are all crimes of opportunity. So if there's a house sitting alone with no lights on for a week or more in the middle of a bunch of fields, people are going to notice, oh, hey, there's nobody over there. Let's go see what's going on. And, that's when an alarm system or even a dog can really come in handy.
Mhm.
So, it's not like we're telling you there are crimes in a place, you can't live there, you can't avoid it. You just figure out ways to mitigate it. You become strategic, you become a little bit more
Like streetwise, I guess.
streetwise. Perfect
Yeah.
word. Thank you. Yeah.
People also ask if we use like the US State Department travel advisories for this category, and the answer is no, we don't. Um, I think one came out just a couple days ago, and they had, I can't remember all the countries, but it was a bunch of new destinations, and they had Panama pretty high on the list. We don't use those warnings because we don't, they're not really realistic. If they were really being realistic, they would probably include United States, a bunch of cities in the United States on the list. Um, yeah, you just take it with a grain of salt, basically.
Exactly.
We
And
prefer to get the inside scoop from people who are actually there and living there and have experience with um, all the things we've been talking about.
right. Who knows who it is that's sitting behind a desk in DC somewhere writing up these warnings
I don't
that they
know.
post on the government websites. And if you have trouble believing this, or if you're a little bit skeptical about this, I encourage you to go to different countries' government websites. So, for example, go to the French government website and take a look at their warning about going to the US. It will probably be shocking to you to find out how terrified the rest of the world is of going to
Hmm.
the United States. So again, take it with a grain of salt, and
Yep.
keep a broad perspective when it comes to thinking about this kind of thing. Okay, let's move on a little bit. So we've mentioned cost of living, which I think for most people is probably one of like the biggest concerns, or maybe not a concern, but certainly a deal breaker. All of these other things aren't necessarily deal breakers. You might be able to make a concession, make a compromise, but if you can't afford to live in a place, you just can't afford to live in a place. Tell us about the budgets, basically.
Sure. So the budgets are put together for couples. They look at a series of categories, things like rent or accommodation, transportation, and that could be using public transport, or if you have your own car, roughly how much is that going to cost you per month? Utilities, things like your monthly electricity bill, your water bill, um, the cost of a cell phone with a basic monthly plan, entertainment. So, how much would you spend out on meals and drinks, and say going to the movie theater or something similar? And then how much you'd spend on groceries. We also include two extra categories. So, we look at the cost of a basic GP visit. So, going to a medical appointment, roughly how much does that cost? And then how much for household help, whether that be a cleaner or a gardener or some sort of part-time household help. So for all these different categories, we try to standardize it as much as possible. For instance, with rent, it's hard to compare. I know within Paris, we're talking about Paris a lot, but you have all these different areas, and it could be drastically different rent prices in one area to the next, from my understanding. So we
Yeah.
try to look at where would most expats want to live in each place,
Hmm.
um, zoom in on that area, and then look at the cost of a two-bedroom, two-bathroom apartment between 70 and 100 square meters, which isn't always possible in every destination that we cover, but that's kind of the general marker of size that we look for a monthly rental. Um, and we get this information again from our own personal experience of spending time in these places. But in most cases, we have a trusted longtime contributor on the ground, or several, who can help us come up with a basic monthly plan for the cost of living.
And just a quick note on this, because I know a lot of people. All right, I'm going to try and think of a different place than Paris. But Paris is a really good example in this category because it is such an expensive city. So, all right, I have to do it. In Paris, if you're here and you're here as a visitor, as a tourist, you're living, you're frequenting the tourist places, you're definitely spending more money than you would normally living day to day. So many people say, well, oh, I've been to Portugal. It's not that cheap in Portugal. I've been to
Mhm.
Italy. It's not that cheap in Italy, or wherever, pick your spot. First of all, that's not an accurate representation of what it's actually like to live there, which is why we're always so careful to talk to people who are who have the experience of budgeting as a resident, not as a tourist or a visitor. Because right, you're not going to have a hamburger next to the Eiffel Tower every day that you're living here. But if you're here as a tourist, you might end up doing that.
Mhm.
You have no choice, and you're on a schedule for the day, and so you end up eating at the most convenient, which means most marked up places. And you're also living, probably, if you're living in an Airbnb, you're probably spending a little bit more than you would with a long term rental, for example. So, it depends on the neighborhoods you're in. Again, if you're spending time as a tourist, you're spending time in the most expensive places, just period. There's no way around it. If you're actually living here, though, and again, this kind of plays into the whole streetwise thing, after you've spent some time in a place, you get to know which neighborhoods are more economical for your budget, or even where to go shopping once a month to get the cheap groceries. I lived in one arrondissement before I recently moved, and it had a great Chinese market. And I, like, maybe once a year, I would go to this Chinese market just to get all of the really, really cheap, great Chinese stuff that would last. You keep it in your pantry and it lasts for ages. But if you were to go just to the store down the street that sold the same things, they would be marked up 10 times. So again, you get to know how it is when
Mhm.
you're actually living there. So yes, it is possible to live in Paris on a budget, even, and many other places in the world. But of course, the destinations that really shine in this category are heavily in Asia, where it is many, many times cheaper to live than it is here in Europe. And also, of course, Latin America, where it can be very, very cheap. We lived as I said, our Panama headquarters for Live and Invest Overseas are in Panama City, which is an incredibly expensive city. It's terribly disproportionate, the cost of living in Panama City to the rest of the country, and it's a very
Mhm.
unfortunate thing. But as soon as you're outside of Panama City, the whole country is crazy affordable. You have to have a little bit of perspective when it comes to the budgets.
Yes, and it's important to point out they're not all inclusive. They're kind of a baseline consideration for your monthly expenses. One really important thing that we leave out is your monthly cost of health insurance. So, usually, in most places, at least to start out, you're going to have private health insurance because in most places it's a requirement of your residency program that you're going through. But we don't include this because it varies wildly person to person, depending on your age, your pre existing conditions, what sort of coverage you're opting for. So it's just not really feasible to include in these sort of generalized budgets. So just to point it out, they're just a baseline consideration. They're not all inclusive.
One other cost, kind of a surprise cost, I guess healthcare is definitely more typical. Everybody knows they're going to have to pay something for healthcare. Something that might not occur to you, though, until you're already in your new home overseas, is the cost of traveling back. Oh, well, and of travel generally, and of course, we're not going to include travel in a budget that's such a baseline budget as Sophia is describing. But it is something to keep in mind if if you're moving to, Latin America. I mean, anywhere, wherever you're moving, you're probably going to want to explore your new region. Whether if that means you're in Ubud in uh,
Bali,
remind me.
Bali, Indonesia.
In Bali, thank you. If you're in Ubud in Bali, Indonesia, you're probably not going to stay on that little island for the entire time that you are living in Bali. You're going to want to see the rest of the island. You're going to want to see, other islands. You're probably going to want to go to Thailand. It's right there. Go over to Singapore, Australia. I mean, you're in the neighborhood. Why not take advantage? So that's one thing that you might not be anticipating. And it's just a little bug I want to plant in your ear. But something that I know everybody who moves overseas will definitely have to do is travel back home. Unless you're a very unique person, you're going to want to go back to see your family, your friends, your hometown, go back for holidays, for birthdays, for, who knows what. And if you want to make that trip regularly, if you want to do it every year, if you have grandkids and you want to see them every 6 months and, so that they don't get too grown up for you while you're gone, factor that in, that's
Mhm.
something to keep in mind also with distance from where you're living if you want to travel back regularly. Um, but just another little thing to keep in mind that a lot of people don't necessarily think about when they're in the excitement of thinking, "Oh, I'm just going to be overseas and I'll be in my exotic new home," and you kind of forget that the world is still as big as it was before you made that move, and you might want to check it out. All
True.
right, that I think kind of covers everything that I wanted to talk about. Is there anything else, Sophia, that we haven't touched on that you think is important for people to know about the index?
One thing that we did a little bit differently this year, we presented things in order of how they came out in the rankings. I know in previous years we've kind of separated it into categories. So we did, best beach, best historical destination, best small town, best city, etc. And we did away with that this year, and we just kind of presented things as they turned out. So that was kind of a new way of organizing it. Which kind of just let us, not be constrained by those 5 categories that we've been using in the past. And then another thing that we did was put in some crazy graphs at the end of the index. So at the beginning, we were talking about entertainment and recreation, and I thought about those categories a lot as well. And I thought it would be really cool to have like a bubble chart that shows kind of a cross section of the two. So, for instance, if a place got a A plus in both categories, would be up in the upper right of this graph, and it got like a high score in entertainment, but lower in recreation, it would be a little bit lower, represented as a bubble in this huge chart.
And I think Sophia's right. As soon as you see it, it becomes very immediately readable. The differences
Mhm.
between all these places. Another graphic that I would like to put up at this point would be all of the destinations and their grades. So, Sophia, I know that you probably have that table in front of you.
So number one was Comporta, Portugal. Its final grade was A. Then Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, A as well. And Mexico is always hot on the heels of Portugal in these indexes. Three was Cayo, Belize, A minus. Four was Northern Cyprus, A minus. Five was Paris, France, A minus. Six, County Clare, Ireland, which was A minus as well. Then we have in number seven, Città St. Angelo, Italy, which was B plus. Eight was Salinas, Ecuador, B plus. Nine was Phuket, Thailand, B plus. 10, Las Terrenas, Dominican Republic, B plus. 11, Santa Marta, Colombia, B. 12 was Kotor, Montenegro, B. 13, Tierras Altas, Panama, B. 14, Istria, Croatia, B. And then in 15th, Ubud, Bali, Indonesia with a B minus.
Great. And so, real, if you can, in any quick manner, those ones that come at the end of the list, what was it that punched their grade down to have them down at the bottom of the list?
Various things. So, for instance, Ubud, Bali, Indonesia, it's about as far away from North America as you can get. So we were just talking about the cost of travel.
Right.
Distance to North America is one of the categories that we consider. Indonesia makes it really tough in terms of buying real estate, and taxes are not great there. So it got knocked down in those categories. I think Istria, Croatia, it's next to impossible to get residency in Croatia.
Um,
But we decided to include it because a lot of people are looking for only a part-time overseas lifestyle. So
mhm.
it can make sense if that's what you're after. and it has, many other great qualities.
Yeah.
But it also wasn't so great in terms of taxes. And then Tierras Altas, Panama, it's not geographically far from North America, but it is difficult to get to. So this is an
Hmm.
area of near Volcan, Panama, and it takes something like 6 or 7 hours to drive to from Panama City. So it's not very easy to get to. Cost of living isn't as low as it should be. It didn't have a ton in terms of cultural amenities, so it lost some points there. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. No, that's good. I just wanted to give people an idea of, just because some places at the bottom of the list, as we mentioned in the beginning, that doesn't mean that it's a bad choice. If
No.
Ubud, Bali, most people, Bali would be their absolute Shangri La. But when you actually put it on paper and you look at some of these really important factors, you realize, well, yeah, I don't have 3 days to spend traveling every time I want
Mhm.
to go back to the US
Not
or
to
back
mention
to
the jet lag
Panama.
that comes with that.
Yeah. All right, great. And so, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and talk with us today about this. When do you start work on the 2023 index?
Oh god. Maybe tomorrow? I don't know.
I was going to
It's
say
so
not too
long.
long from now.
No, no problem. Thanks so much for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, this was a great conversation. Thanks so much. And I will speak with you again soon. Thanks everyone for listening to Live and Invest Overseas podcast. This has been Kat Kalashian and Sophia Tipley coming to you from Paris, France and London, England, respectively. And we hope to talk to you again soon. Bye.
Bye.